What was it like studying with Bob Brookmeyer?
It was life-changing. It was amazing. Ironically, I had chosen to come to NEC to study with him because I thought I was going to continue the sort of traditional bent of my undergrad education and study with the Brookmeyer of, the Village Vanguard years.
Sure.
And discovered very quickly that Brookmeyer was no longer, and he had moved on to some pretty esoteric concepts, intervallic composition and non-functional harmonies and all sorts of things that I had never really explored. So it was a sort of close call to get into his studio, given my background. But thankfully, he saw some potential in the new work that I was creating with his concepts and let me into the studio for the next 2 years.
Sure. Now, so I just finished reading not too long ago Dave Ravello's book with the interviews with Bob Brookmeyer, and it seems like he went to California for a while, and something happened there, and he turned his thing around and came back and started trying these different compositional concepts like you're talking about. Do you have any are there any that you either still use as exercises or that particularly influenced you, or that you think about now, any of the sort of techniques for composition that he was using back then?
Yeah, I mean, he really stressed melody and he stressed patience as a writer. So rather than moving from one idea to the next great idea to the next great idea, his focus was to stay with one idea and stretch it as long as you possibly could, to the point of being uncomfortable with it. So he actually had us do an assignment once where he wanted us to sort of test the limits of a motif and stretch it as far as we possibly could. And I'm still to this day somewhat proud that I broke the system and had stretched it too far. And he had a good laugh over that and complimented me on stretching a little too far. We had to scale it back. So that was a great experience. And then the intervallic concept was really cool because it opens you up harmonically as well. You think of it as a melodic tool, and it is. But when you examine the results of the intervallic exercises, you can then turn it vertically and come up with harmonic structures based on the same intervallic concepts from which you derived your melodies.
Sure.
And so that was a really earth-shattering concept. I'd never considered that. And once, I went down that path, it opened up some completely new directions for my writing.
Cool. So for the nerds out there, give me can you give like an example of maybe the beginnings of that as an exercise, or what do you mean by the intervallic exercise?
Sure. So a lot of his exercises started with a blank piece of paper. And so this particular one, the top left-hand corner of the paper, we were instructed to write 3 notes. And from those 3 notes, we would analyze the intervals. So the interval between the first 2 notes and its inversion, the last 2 notes and its inversion, the first and third notes and its inversion. And then from there, we were instructed to fill the page all the way to the bottom using nothing but those 6 intervals. And so, again, it takes you out of your comfort zone. It takes you out of your cliches. It takes you out of anything that you would traditionally use in your writing and puts you in a different place. And once you fill the page, you would go back and play through the extended melody and with a pencil circle the ideas that you thought were valuable. And then you would take those particular ideas onto a new piece of paper and then develop those ideas separately. And that's what became your composition.
Okay. And that's where you take these individual ideas and then create a new piece out of it.
Correct.
Now, do you feel like, as a composer, there is something at odds with I'm going to do experiments to try to come up with a piece, as opposed to a more, let's say, organic, spring from your bed in the middle of the night with the idea fully formed in your head kind of approach? How do you navigate the difference between or is there even a conflict between those two ideas?
I don't think there has to be a conflict. I think you can get into a conflict if you're not careful. But the concept from Brookmeyer's perspective was what he called the blank page syndrome. So as a writer, you've got this blank page in front of you. What do you do with that blank page? How do you create music? And so when we think about the concept of writer's block, whether you're writing, words or you're writing music, you can't get past the blank page. You're stuck.
Sure.
And you hesitate to put anything onto the page because either out of fear that it's not quite right or it's not what you're looking for, you're not sure, so you hesitate. And at the end of your writing session, you're still looking at a blank piece of paper. So he called that the blank page syndrome. And this tool, this intervallic tool, was simply a way to work through that obstacle. Mm-hmm. So it's not that he was eschewing the sort of natural or organic process of composition. It was more when that failed you could go to many of his different techniques, including this intervallic exercise, to gain that inspiration that you needed to continue on with the piece.
Sure. I can imagine, too, that if you're Bob Brookmeyer and you've spent already, by the time he's at NEC, whatever it would have been, 40 years or something, creating constant music, you really need a kick in the pants like that to just try to get yourself out of your comfort zone.
Very true. I think if there's a possibility of writing all the possible melodies, he might have gotten pretty close at that point.